Texas Chainsaw Massacre isn't just a horror movie, it's a raw, visceral experience. Watching it feels like stepping into a waking nightmare, a suffocating descent into madness that doesn't loosen its grip even after the credits roll. But what makes it a perfect movie? It's not just the scares, it's the way Tobe Hooper captures the chaos, the human fragility, and the uncanny terror of a world gone wrong. Let's break down why this film remains unparalleled in its impact.
Like a pack of hounds.
What makes the Texas Chainsaw Massacre terrifying is its authenticity. There's no reliance on over-the-top special effects or supernatural elements. Instead, the fear comes from something disturbingly real: people. The antagonists aren't monsters or ghosts, they're humans who've devolved into unspeakable savagery. Leatherface isn't some mythical boogeyman. He's a product of isolation and a deranged family dynamic. The fear the characters experience is palpable. Sally's screams don't feel rehearsed, they feel like primal cries for survival. Marilyn Burns, Sally, was pushed to her physical and emotional limits during filming. Filming in 100-degree Texas heat, enduring grueling hours and performing physically taxing stunts. It translates on screen, and the result is a performance so raw, it's impossible to look away. This movie didn't have a big-budget Hollywood machine behind it. It was a scrappy, independent project where everything felt like it could fall apart at any moment. The oppressive heat, the shoestring budget, and the grueling shoot led to a kind of madness on set. But instead of breaking the film, it made it better. The tension and discomfort bled into the performances and created an almost documentary-like realism. For example, the infamous dinner scene was filmed over 27 consecutive hours, with rotting meat on the table and temperatures skyrocketing in a house with no air conditioning. The actors weren't acting, they were suffering. Gunnar Hansen, who played Leatherface, admitted he was so overwhelmed by the chaos that when he swung his chainsaw around during one scene, he barely missed the actors. That chaos seeps into every frame, making the film feel alive in a way that few horror movies can replicate. Hooper and cinematographer Daniel Pearl approached the Texas Chainsaw Massacre like a documentary. The handheld camera work, gritty visuals, and natural lighting give the movie an unpolished, voyeuristic feel. It feels like something you shouldn't be watching, like you stumbled across a snuff film in someone's basement. The grainy 16mm film stock only adds to the grimy, unnerving atmosphere. The opening sequence, with its flashes of grotesque images accompanied by John Larroquette's chilling narration, sets the tone perfectly. From the moment you hear that eerie, metallic camera sound effect, you're on edge. You know this isn't going to be a comfortable ride. Beneath the blood and terror, there's a layer of social critique. The film reflects the anxiety and decay of 1970s America, a country grappling with the Vietnam War, economic instability, and the erosion of traditional values. The Sawyers, Leatherface's family, are a twisted mirror of the American nuclear family. They're products of a dying rural economy, left behind by industrialization. The meatpacking industry they once relied on has abandoned them, leaving them to fend for themselves in the most horrifying way imaginable. The film also critiques humanity's relationship with violence and consumption. The Sawyers' butchering of humans mirrors the inhumane treatment of animals in slaughterhouses, which Hooper intentionally drew attention to. Leatherface's iconic mask made of human skin reflects his desperate attempt to find identity and purpose in a world that has left him discarded. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is its connection to real-life events, specifically the horrific crimes of Ed Gein, a Wisconsin farmer whose gruesome acts shocked the world in the 1950s. While the Texas Chainsaw Massacre isn't a direct retelling of Gein's crimes, his legacy deeply inspired the film's tone, characters, and aesthetic. To understand why the movie resonates so strongly with audiences, we have to dig into the twisted mind of Ed Gein and draw the eerie parallels between his real-life atrocities and the fictional horrors of Leatherface and the Sawyer family.
Fucking unattractive they are.
Do you know what Ed Gein said about women?
Ed Gein, maitre d' canal bar?
No. Serial killer, Wisconsin in the 50s.
And what did Ed say?
He said, when I see a pretty girl walking down the street, I think two things. One part of me wants to take her out and talk to her, be real nice and sweet and treat her right.
And what the other part of him think?
What her head would look like on a stick.
Ed Gein lived in Plainfield, Wisconsin, a small, quiet town that could easily resemble the desolate rural landscape of the film. Known as the Butcher of Plainfield, Gein wasn't a prolific killer, but a deeply disturbed individual whose crimes blurred the line between murder and madness. After his mother's death in 1945, Gein became increasingly isolated and obsessed with preserving her memory. His relationship with her had been controlling and abusive. She raised him with a puritanical worldview, demonizing women and instilling deep psychological scars. Left alone in the family farmhouse, Gein descended into a world of depravity and obsession with death. In 1957, police discovered the true extent of Gein's crimes. After a local hardware store owner went missing, investigators traced the disappearance to Gein's farm. What they found there was beyond comprehension. Human body parts turned into household objects, such as bowls made of skulls, a chair upholstered in human skin, and lampshades fashioned from faces. Masks and clothing crafted from human flesh, which Gein reportedly wore during bizarre rituals, allowing him to become his victim. While Gein's crimes and the Texas Chain Saw Massacre are not identical, the film takes heavy inspiration from his disturbing legacy. Leatherface's masks. One of the most iconic elements of Leatherface is his use of human skin masks, a horrifying echo of Ed Gein's creations. Like Gein, Leatherface wears the faces of his victims as a way of transforming himself. In the film, his masks even reflect different personalities. The killer wears a formal mask during the dinner scene, highlighting the Sawyers' twisted attempt to mimic societal norms. Similarly, Gein reportedly wore his flesh masks during rituals where he would become his mother or his victims. The House of Horrors. The Sawyer family home, littered with bones, furniture made of human remains, and grotesque decorations, is a direct nod to the police reports from Gein's farm. The infamous dinner scene where Sally is forced to sit at a table surrounded by skeletal decor feels ripped straight from the photographs of Gein's macabre collection. The visceral reaction audiences have to this scene stems from its uncanny resemblance to real-life horror. The rural setting. Both Gein's life and the film's events take place in rural, isolated communities where help feels far away. The remoteness of these settings amplifies the sense of helplessness and dread. Plainfield, Wisconsin, and the barren Texas countryside evoke a shared fear. What horrors could unfold in a place so detached from the rest of the world? Themes of madness and family. Gein's crimes were rooted in his dysfunctional relationship with his mother, a controlling figure who dominated his life even after death. Similarly, the Sawyer family operates as a disturbing unit, feeding off each other's madness. Leatherface is depicted as the obedient, infantilized member of the family, mirroring Gein's dependency on his mother. The film takes the theme further, portraying the Sawyers as a grotesque parody of the nuclear family. Ed Gein worked as a handyman, but his fascination with dismemberment and his treatment of human bodies mirrored the methods used in slaughterhouses. This comparison is woven directly into the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. The Sawyers are former slaughterhouse workers who, after the collapse of the industry, turned their trade on humans. The film's frequent imagery of meat hooks, animal carcasses, and chainsaws reinforces the uncomfortable link between human and animal butchery, a reflection of Gein's own twisted practices. The genius of the Texas Chain Saw Massacre is that it's both fiction and a mirror of reality. Its ties to Ed Gein rooted in something tangible and horrifying, while its chaotic energy and relentless pace turn it into a pure cinematic nightmare. By blending fact and fiction, Tobe Hooper crafted a film that feels timeless, an unflinching exploration of fear, madness, and the darkest corners of the human psyche. It's not just a horror movie, it's a harrowing reminder of what people, left unchecked, are capable of becoming. Leatherface is one of the most complex villains in horror. He's not evil for the sake of being evil. He's terrified, confused, and operating out of fear and instinct. His masks represent different personas, a desperate attempt to navigate his warped existence. He's a victim of his environment as much as he's a perpetrator of violence. The scene where he sits in the family home after Sally escapes, nervously looking around like a scared animal, is haunting. It humanizes him in a way that's rare for a horror antagonist. Once the horror begins, it doesn't let up. The movie is a lean 83 minutes with no filler. Every scene serves a purpose, driving the story forward at breakneck speed. The last 30 minutes are particularly harrowing, with Sally's relentless chase and eventual escape. By the time the credits roll, you're left breathless and emotionally drained, much like Sally herself. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre didn't just influence horror, it changed it. Its raw, unfiltered style paved the way for films like The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity. Its blend of psychological terror and implied violence inspired countless filmmakers. Yet, despite being endlessly imitated, it's never been surpassed. The Texas Chain Saw Massacre isn't a perfect movie because it's polished or refined. It's perfect because it's not. Its imperfections, its grit, chaos, and rawness make it feel real. It's a film that taps into our primal fears and refuses to let go. It's not just a movie you watch, it's a movie you survive. The knowledge that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is inspired by Ed Gein elevates the horror. It's not just fiction, it's grounded in the terrifying reality of what human beings are capable of. The film taps into a primal fear of isolation, the breakdown of sanity, and the blurred line between humanity and monstrosity. Tobe Hooper himself acknowledged Gein's influence, but he used it as a starting point to craft something even larger. By channeling the essence of Gein's crimes into the fictional world of Leatherface and the Sawyers, Hooper created a story that feels personal and universal at the same time. It's a reminder that horror doesn't need to rely on ghosts or the supernatural to leave a lasting impression. Sometimes the scariest thing of all is what lies within us. While the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is undeniably a masterpiece of raw, unrelenting horror, I have to admit that there's a special place in my heart for the 1986 sequel, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. I actually enjoy it just a little bit more, even though I'll concede that the first film is the superior movie overall. Why? Because the sequel leans fully into its absurdity, delivering a blend of over-the-top gore and dark comedy that somehow works perfectly as a horror comedy. Where the original was stripped down and haunting, Part 2 cranks up the volume, literally. With the rock and roll soundtrack, exaggerated performances, and Dennis Hopper wielding dual chainsaws like a maniacal knight, it's a film that's self-aware in the best way possible. The campy tone and grotesque humor feel like a natural evolution of the original, amplifying the family's deranged antics into something surreal and strangely fun. For example, the dinner scene in the first movie is horrifying and tense, but in the sequel it's outright ridiculous, dripping with gallows humor as Leatherface and his family push their psychosis to the brink of parody. And that's what makes it so enjoyable. Director Tobe Hooper wasn't trying to recreate the slow-burn terror of the first film. Instead, he leaned into the absurdity of the concept, crafting a movie that's as wild and chaotic as the family at its center. It's a rare sequel that doesn't try to overshadow the original, but instead reinvents the tone to offer something fresh. The cheesiness might not be for everyone, but for me, it's what makes the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 such a fun ride. It's loud, messy, and completely unhinged, and I wouldn't want it any other way.